In every democratic society, one of the fundamental pillars that supports the relationship between the state and its people is the right to truth and transparency. This is not simply a philosophical idea or a moral ideal, it is a practical, legal, and social necessity. When members of a community are faced with a situation that raises questions, concerns, or even fears, they look to institutions, especially the police, not only for protection, but for honest and clear communication. This is how societies function effectively and ethically. The right to truth means that the public deserves to know the facts, particularly in cases that involve events, decisions, or actions which directly or indirectly affect community safety, integrity, and trust. This is especially critical when there is a suspicion, perception, or even possibility that something may have gone wrong, whether procedurally, ethically, or legally. In such cases, silence or ambiguity from public institutions can be more damaging than the event itself. Transparency does not mean compromising investigations or releasing confidential personal details. It means providing the public with what is appropriate, accurate, and necessary to maintain public trust. It means speaking clearly and consistently, explaining delays honestly, and acknowledging uncertainty when necessary. Transparency does not always come with neat answers, but it always respects the right of people to be informed. In the case surrounding the Liverpool driver incident and the many questions it has raised, the community's request is not extreme, emotional, or unreasonable. The community is not demanding special access or sensational details. The community is asking for what is fair, to know what happened, why certain decisions were made, and whether proper procedures were followed. This is not about gossip or blame. It is about clarity, accountability, and institutional integrity. Public trust in law enforcement is built through years of consistent conduct, but it can be shaken in a moment when key information is withheld, when statements contradict each other, or when official responses seem vague or incomplete. A community that feels it is being kept in the dark begins to ask deeper questions, not just about the incident itself, but about the systems that are meant to serve it. Doubt grows where truth is delayed. Speculation thrives where transparency is lacking. This is not to say that the police should rush to speak before all facts are confirmed. It is not to say that confidentiality and procedure should be ignored. But it is to say that communication must be proactive, respectful, and open, rather than defensive or distant. When police forces recognize the value of public truth, they don't just serve justice, they earn lasting credibility. It is also important to educate ourselves and each other on why the right to truth matters so deeply in civil society. This right is not just about isolated cases. It is about setting a standard for how authorities respond to public concern. When we defend the right to know, we are reinforcing the very mechanisms that protect us all. We are saying that power must be answerable, that authority must engage, that silence is not an acceptable strategy when public confidence is at stake. In classrooms, we teach young people about freedom of information, about the importance of open government, and about the role of police in serving the people. We cannot preach these values on paper and then abandon them in practice. The right to truth must be reflected in action, in attitude, and in the way institutions relate to the communities they serve. When a serious matter arises, one that touches nerves, raises questions, and involves public safety, the right to know becomes even more pressing. It is not a demand made in hostility. It is a request made in good faith. A community that asks for truth is not a threat to order, it is a partner in justice. But that partnership can only be sustained if both sides communicate honestly. Ultimately, transparency is not about making the public feel good. It is about respecting their intelligence, their rights, and their role in a functioning democracy. The right to truth is not a slogan, it is a civic necessity. And when that right is honored, everyone benefits, the public, the police, and the broader society we all want to protect. In any civilized society, the role of the police is foundational. Law enforcement is not merely a force of authority, it is a public institution entrusted with great power and immense responsibility. That power must be balanced with accountability. Police accountability is not optional. It is a fundamental requirement for justice, public confidence, and social stability. Without it, the entire structure of community trust begins to crack. Accountability, in the simplest terms, means answerability. It means that the police are not above the law they are meant to uphold. They are public servants, not private actors. Their authority comes from the consent of the governed from the people. And that consent is sustained only when the people believe that officers of the law are themselves subject to scrutiny, standards, and consequences. When communities raise concerns about how a case is handled, especially one that has touched a nerve, like the Liverpool driver case, they are not attacking the institution. They are fulfilling their role in a democracy. It is the duty of the public to question, and it is the duty of public institutions to respond. That's what accountability looks like. It is not about embarrassment or confrontation. It is about responsibility and responsiveness. Police accountability is particularly vital in situations where public perception begins to diverge from the official narrative. When people see inconsistencies, unanswered questions, or a lack of communication, they begin to wonder whether those in power are being transparent. It is not always the incident itself that causes unrest, it is the handling of it. And when the police are perceived to be defensive, dismissive, or distant, the damage to public confidence can be profound. But accountability should not be viewed as a threat by the police, it should be seen as a strength. A transparent and accountable police force earns more respect, not less. When law enforcement officers take responsibility for errors, explain their procedures clearly, and open themselves up to review, they reinforce the integrity of their profession. They demonstrate that no one is beyond question and that justice is truly blind. We also need to understand that police accountability operates on two levels, individual and institutional. On the individual level, if an officer makes a mistake or abuses their position, there must be appropriate consequences. On the institutional level, the systems that allow for such actions or that fail to correct them must also be examined. Accountability is not just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about improving the system so that future mistakes are less likely. This is why accountability must be proactive, not reactive. It cannot be something that only happens after public outrage or media attention. It must be built into the daily functioning of police departments through oversight bodies, internal reviews, clear reporting standards, and a culture of openness. Only then can accountability be meaningful, not performative. Educationally, we must teach that police are not infallible. Like all humans, they can make errors, but unlike most professions, those errors can have profound, life-altering consequences. That is why the standards for accountability must be higher, not lower, for those who wear the badge. They are not simply enforcers of law, they are symbols of it. And symbols must be held to the highest standard. In the specific case of the Liverpool driver incident, the community's desire for police accountability is not born from hostility. It is a rational, civic, minded response to a perceived gap between public expectation and institutional behavior. The people are not asking for vengeance. They are asking for process, for explanation, for reassurance that the system works the same for everyone no matter who is involved. This is how democracy functions. Institutions must always be answerable to the people. When that chain of accountability is broken, when responses are vague, delayed, or seemingly dismissive, the result is not just frustration. It is disillusionment, and once disillusionment sets in, rebuilding trust becomes incredibly difficult. To safeguard that trust, police forces must reaffirm their commitment to accountability, not just in words but in actions. They must listen, engage, and explain. They must own their decisions, clarify their processes, and welcome independent scrutiny. That is not weakness, that is professionalism. In conclusion, police accountability is not about blame. It is about building a better relationship between the people and those who serve them. It is about ensuring that authority is exercised with integrity and that justice is not only done but seen to be done. Without accountability, there can be no credibility. And without credibility, law enforcement loses the very trust it depends on to operate effectively. In public discourse, particularly around high-profile or emotionally charged incidents, it is crucial to make a clear distinction between seeking accountability and attacking individuals. This difference often gets blurred in the media, in public forums, and even in institutional responses. That is why it is so important, especially in educational and civic discussions, to reaffirm a principle that safeguards both justice and dignity. We can, and must, demand the truth without making it personal. In the case involving the Liverpool driver and Louise Hay, many members of the public have voiced concern, confusion, and disappointment regarding the lack of clarity or transparency from the authorities. These concerns are not centered around the individual involved in the incident, but rather the way in which the case has been handled by those in positions of institutional power. However, when discussions are not managed carefully, the public's legitimate concern for truth and process can be misinterpreted or misrepresented as a campaign against an individual. This is a mistake we must avoid. Education on civic engagement must reinforce this. It is entirely appropriate to question the actions of institutions without targeting people personally. The public has the right to demand full and transparent explanations from the police or any other authority. Doing so is not about undermining individuals, it is about protecting public interest. When a case raises serious questions, silence from authorities forces the public to ask harder questions, not because they wish to, but because they must. At the same time, we must remember that turning such scrutiny into a personal vendetta does not help the cause of truth. It distracts from the core issue, whether the system operated fairly, whether proper procedure was followed, and whether accountability has been upheld. Personal attacks often shift the narrative away from structural critique and toward emotional conflict, which can cloud understanding and delay real solutions. Focusing on facts rather than feelings or reputations is how real change and progress are achieved. For example, in teaching young people about responsible activism or civic action, we stress the value of separating the issue from the individual. If a policy is flawed, we debate the policy, not the character of the person who wrote it. If a decision is questionable, we investigate the decision-making process, not launch personal attacks. The same must apply here. The focus must remain on the institutional response, not on vilifying or defending an individual. This distinction also protects those who speak out. When the conversation is framed around systems and not personalities, it becomes harder to dismiss concerned citizens as biased or malicious. It brings the focus back to the question: are institutions acting in the public interest? Are they being honest, consistent, and fair? That is the level of discussion a healthy democracy demands. It is also important to understand that by avoiding personal attacks, we preserve the humanity and dignity of everyone involved, whether directly or indirectly. Public accountability does not require public shaming. In fact, the most effective demands for justice are those that are calm, reasoned, and respectful. They force institutions to respond because they are built on logic and fairness, not outrage and accusation. In this particular case, the public's demand is simple: to understand what happened, why it happened, and whether the system worked as it should have. The call for truth is rooted in process, not personal judgment. It is a civic responsibility, not a social vendetta. This distinction must be protected and reinforced every time the conversation begins to stray. Educational systems, civic training, and even journalism must continue to emphasize this point. Criticizing systems does not mean attacking individuals. Holding institutions accountable does not mean vilifying a person. And asking difficult questions does not imply bad intentions. These principles are the cornerstone of informed public discourse. Furthermore, when authorities misunderstand or misframe this kind of public questioning as a personal attack, they often retreat into defensiveness. This only worsens the situation, but when it's clear that the community is focused on truth, not targeting, then genuine dialogue can occur. That's when answers can begin to emerge. To conclude, the pursuit of truth and justice must always be guided by a commitment to fairness. We must seek the truth not because we want to harm, but because we want to understand. We ask questions not to blame, but to protect, and we do so not to break trust, but to build it. Let us always remember, we can question authority without condemning individuals. We can demand answers without making enemies, and we can serve justice best when we focus not on personalities, but on principles. Public confidence is one of the most valuable assets a law enforcement institution can possess. It is not built overnight, nor is it maintained automatically. It is earned over time through consistent honesty, responsible action, and respectful communication. In situations where critical information is withheld, delayed, or inconsistently presented, that confidence begins to erode. And once lost, it is extremely difficult to rebuild. This is why the way police respond to public concerns is just as important as the facts of the incident itself. When something troubling happens, such as the case involving the Liverpool driver and Louise Hay, the community immediately turns to the authorities, not only for answers but also for reassurance. People want to know that their concerns are being heard. They want to feel that the system is fair, impartial, and dependable. When these needs are not met with clear, timely, and honest responses, the trust that binds the community to its institutions weakens. A lack of communication or inconsistent messaging causes doubt to take root. It is not simply about the absence of information, it's about what that absence implies. When institutions fall silent, the public may start to assume the worst. People begin to ask, what are they hiding? Or why are they not telling us what's going on? These are not irrational questions. They are the natural result of a communication gap. In this vacuum, rumors spread, misinformation takes hold, emotions intensify, and rather than resolving the issue, the silence deepens it. It's important to emphasize that this breakdown in confidence is not always due to wrongdoing. In some cases, the delay in information may stem from bureaucratic processes, internal reviews, or legal protocols. However, when these delays are not explained clearly and openly, the public is left to draw its own conclusions, many of which may be negative. That is why consistent, respectful, and honest engagement with the community is not just good practice. It is essential. In civic education, we often talk about the social contract. This is the idea that the public agrees to obey laws and respect authority in exchange for protection, fairness, and truth from those who govern. When that balance is disrupted, when people feel they are holding up their end of the deal but not receiving the same in return, confidence in public systems begins to collapse. And when people stop believing in the integrity of those systems, they may stop engaging with them altogether. This erosion of confidence doesn't just affect one case. It has broader consequences. People may become less willing to cooperate with police investigations. They may hesitate to report crimes or come forward as witnesses. They may begin to view the justice system not as a protector of rights, but as something to be feared or distrusted. This damages not only community safety, but also the effectiveness of the police themselves. A police force without public support is a weakened institution. This is why transparency is not just a matter of public relations, it is a matter of operational necessity. By being forthcoming and honest even when the answers are difficult or incomplete, the police can reinforce their relationship with the community. People respect honesty. They understand that some details may take time to confirm. What they don't understand, and should not be asked to accept, is silence in the face of legitimate questions. In the case surrounding the Liverpool driver, the call for information is not an overreaction. It is a response to a perceived breakdown in that trust. The longer the public feels ignored or misled, the more damage is done, not to one case, but to the credibility of the institution as a whole. This is why handling public communication carefully and transparently in such moments is critical. Educationally, we must help communities understand both their rights and their responsibilities in these situations. Citizens have the right to ask for clarity, and they have the responsibility to do so constructively. Likewise, institutions have the duty to provide that clarity, not to dismiss public concern or label it as interference. Constructive dialogue and mutual respect are the tools that rebuild and sustain public confidence. In conclusion, public trust is not a given. It must be nurtured, protected, and restored whenever necessary. The impact of police silence, inconsistency, or lack of transparency goes far beyond one incident. It shapes how safe, respected, and heard a community feels. And when confidence fades, it is not just a local issue, it becomes a threat to the very integrity of democratic society. That's why the truth must always be a priority, not just for justice, but for trust itself. In any healthy democratic society, public dialogue serves as a critical mechanism through which citizens express concerns. Institutions offer clarity, and both sides work toward mutual understanding. This is not simply an act of open communication. It is a core function of democratic life. When public dialogue is supported, encouraged, and protected, it leads to stronger institutions, more informed citizens, and ultimately, a more just society. Public dialogue refers to the free and respectful exchange of views between the public and those in positions of authority. It thrives in an environment where information flows in both directions, not just from institutions to people, but also from people to institutions. When this exchange breaks down, so too does the capacity for society to solve its own problems. It becomes easier for frustration to turn into cynicism, for confusion to evolve into suspicion, and for silence to be interpreted as complicity. In the context of the Liverpool driver case, the lack of clear communication from authorities has left many citizens feeling excluded from that essential dialogue. Their questions, reasonable, civic-minded, and respectful, have been met not with responses, but with silence or ambiguity. This absence of genuine exchange has not only deepened public concern, it has also stalled the very process by which trust is maintained between the people and the systems meant to serve them. Education systems often emphasize the importance of free speech, open inquiry, and civic participation. These values are not abstract. They are designed to prepare citizens for moments exactly like this, moments where something doesn't feel right, and where people must feel empowered to speak up and ask for answers. Public dialogue is the tool we use to question institutions without undermining them, to express concern without inciting conflict, and to pursue clarity without demanding perfection. When authorities resist or avoid dialogue, it sends the wrong message. It suggests that public voices are not welcome, that questions are inconvenient, and that those in power prefer control over conversation. This kind of posture undermines not just the specific issue at hand, it weakens the very principle of participatory governance. When people believe their voices do not matter, they stop using them. That is how disengagement takes root. That is how public life becomes less vibrant, less responsive, and less democratic. On the other hand, when authorities embrace public dialogue, even when the questions are tough, the atmosphere changes. The public sees that institutions are confident, transparent, and prepared to stand behind their actions. The dialogue itself becomes a form of accountability, a process through which the truth is not just delivered, but co-created through collective examination. People feel involved, they feel respected, and most importantly, they feel heard. This is not just about having a press conference or issuing a formal statement. Public dialogue must be ongoing, sincere, and two-way. It may involve community meetings, detailed updates, interviews with oversight bodies, or facilitated discussions. The format can vary, but the principle must remain the same. People deserve answers, and institutions must be prepared to provide them in a way that is open to public feedback. Let's be clear, public dialogue is not about finger-pointing or blame games. It is about understanding processes, identifying gaps, and finding common ground. It allows the public to ask, for example, what were the procedures followed in this case, or why hasn't more information been shared? It allows authorities to say, here's what we know so far, or here's why we are limited in what we can say right now. This mutual honesty fosters empathy and maturity in public discourse. Moreover, engaging in public dialogue during sensitive cases like this sets an example for future scenarios. It creates a culture of openness where people feel empowered to participate in shaping their society. It reinforces the idea that law enforcement and public institutions are not distant entities, but living parts of the community they serve. This sense of shared responsibility, rooted in respectful conversation, is what keeps democratic societies resilient. In conclusion, the importance of public dialogue cannot be overstated. It is not merely a reaction to crises, it is a preventative tool that strengthens relationships between citizens and institutions. When practiced sincerely, it builds trust. When avoided, it creates suspicion. In the case of the Liverpool driver and Louise Hay, the public is not asking for confrontation. They are asking for conversation. That is not just a fair request, it is a vital one, because without dialogue, there can be no understanding. And without understanding, there can be no justice. In any society that calls itself democratic, the right to question authority is not only allowed, it is fundamental. This right is a cornerstone of justice, accountability, and transparency. It ensures that power is not exercised unchecked and that institutions remain responsive to the people they serve. In the case surrounding the Liverpool driver and the tragic death of Louise Hay, it is this right, the right to ask questions, seek clarity, and demand truth, that is now at stake. When people begin to feel uneasy about a public institution's handling of a sensitive matter, their instinct is to seek answers. That instinct must be protected and encouraged, not punished or suppressed. The ability to challenge decisions, raise concerns, and call for transparency is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of responsible citizenship. It reflects engagement, care, and a desire for justice. Civic education teaches us that institutions, no matter how powerful, do not exist above questioning. In fact, the health of a democracy depends on how it responds when questioned. Strong institutions are not afraid of scrutiny. They welcome it because they know that being accountable enhances their legitimacy. Weak institutions, on the other hand, fear questions. They avoid them, silence them, or twist them into something they are not attempts to harm, disrupt, or discredit. That is why it is troubling when individuals who raise valid concerns are dismissed or criticized for causing trouble. In reality, asking for truth is not causing trouble. It is an exercise in democracy. Whether the question is being asked in a town hall meeting, in a letter to officials, on social media, or in a peaceful protest, the principle remains the same. People have the right to hold power to account. What's more, this right must be defended universally, not selectively. It should not matter how influential or anonymous the speaker is, how popular the cause, or how uncomfortable the questions may be. If we begin to categorize some questions as acceptable and others as inconvenient, we risk turning truth, seeking into a privilege instead of a right. That is not justice. That is censorship disguised as order. In the context of the Louise Hay case, many citizens have sought clarity around the role of the police, the transparency of the investigation, and the inconsistencies in public information. These are fair questions. They are not driven by malice or conspiracy. They are driven by concern for public safety, for the integrity of law enforcement, and for justice for a lost life. To treat these concerns as interference is to misunderstand the role of the public in a democratic system. Educational systems must emphasize that respecting authority and questioning authority are not opposites. In fact, they go hand in hand. True respect for an institution comes from a belief that it will do what is right, and that it will correct itself when it does not. Blind obedience is not respect, it is compliance, and compliance without accountability breeds injustice. We must also make room for constructive discomfort. Sometimes, asking difficult questions will create tension. That is a natural part of civic life, but avoiding that tension only delays the work of resolution. When institutions learn to sit with discomfort, when they can say, "We hear your concerns, and here is what we are doing about them," that is when real progress occurs. It is equally important that people who exercise this right are protected, not punished. Whistleblowers, journalists, community advocates, and concerned citizens must be shielded from retaliation. Their courage to speak is often what brings truth to light. If questioning power comes with the risk of being silenced, intimidated, or labeled as disloyal, then democracy begins to rot from within. The strength of a free society lies in its ability to listen, to make room for disagreement, to admit mistakes, and to change course when needed. This is not weakness, this is wisdom. The right to question authority ensures that power remains a tool of service, not domination. It reminds leaders that they are stewards, not rulers, and it empowers ordinary people to stand up for what is right, even when the path is not easy. In summary, the right to question authority must be held sacred. It is the mechanism through which justice is preserved and through which institutions stay honest. In the case of Louise Hay, the questions being asked are not attacks, they are acts of engagement. They are expressions of the very democratic values we claim to uphold. To honor her memory and to protect our shared future, we must ensure that those who seek truth are never treated as enemies, but recognized as guardians of justice.